Well, welcome back to this month's unit on evangelism in the Old Testament. We've been following along in the Smith and Helway's Formation series, and today we'll be taking a look at a text from 2 Kings, the 5th chapter. We've talked this month about evangelism and the definition, which is the spread of the gospel of Christ through preaching and or personal witness. What we really want to do by looking at evangelism in the Old Testament is to try to tease out what exactly evangelism means and how we best can do that in today's modern times. We're going to take a look at two evangelists today. One, a likely suspect, a prophet, Elisha. The other, an unnamed Jewish slave girl. So let's set the story up by looking at the first two verses from chapter 5. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. So Aram is what we would call Syria today in modern times, and they were a neighbor at the time of Israel, and they were also enemies. We learned that Naaman is the general and a mighty warrior and very successful with a recent military victory over Israel. He's also reports directly to the king, and he is thought of in high favor from the king. Now Naaman has one flaw, and that is leprosy. It must be difficult to have such a public flaw when you're such a public figure. We also learn in the story that there is a captive Jewish slave girl who now serves as a servant of Naaman's wife. Well, let's continue with our text and take a look at verses 3 through 5. She said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." What a surprise we have here. What would you do if you were captured by your country's enemies, taken away into a foreign land, forced to work as a servant, and treated as property? Well, surprisingly, this young Jewish slave girl senses the deep need and the deep hurt of the general, and she has compassion for him, and she wants to help him solve this problem. She knows of someone who, if he would go to, could solve this for him. We're also surprised that the general buys in 100% to what the Jewish girl says, to the point that he goes to his boss, the king, who also believes. The king then arranges passage for Naaman to go to Israel. So we pick up the second half of verse 5 through verse 8. He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man send me word to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." So who exactly are the believers and the unbelievers in this story? We have here the general and the king of Syria sending Naaman there to the God of Israel because they believe in these miraculous powers, and we have the king of Israel clouded with doubt. In verse 8 we have, "But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. 'Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel.'" Elisha, being the man of God, probably saw what God was doing in this situation and welcomed the opportunity to share about Israel's God. So the next surprise occurs when the general shows up to Naaman's house. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, "I thought that for me he would surely come out, and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abaniah and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in rage. So why would Elisha treat the general with such disrespect? Or perhaps was it that Elisha understood that what God was revealing was an opportunity to cure the general of more than just a skin disease? Perhaps Elisha understood that what he really needed was a cure for his ego and his pridefulness. We also know that the general came prepared to pay for his grace. And I suspect Elisha understood God's grace doesn't really work like that. Fortunately, cooler heads prevail. But his servants approached and said to him, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. Oh, how we want it to be a worthy task in order to achieve salvation. It's hard for us to believe that God's grace is actually free. The story leads to a confession of faith. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company. He came and stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant." But he said, talking about Elisha, "As the Lord lives whom I serve, I will accept nothing." He urged him to accept, but he refused. Then Naaman said, "If not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord." So what are we to learn about evangelism from today's story? First, the young slave girl reminds us that it's often in our hard places of life that we are our best witness. Despite her sufferings, she was able to understand the need of Naaman, and she had great compassion and no desire to see him suffer. Secondly, we have to believe that this young slave girl was a person of integrity. Why else would Naaman have believed her and gone to the king to ask for passage to Israel? I suspect that who she said she was, lined up with the God that she said she believed in. Third, we see in Elisha one who served and wanted to put the focus on God, not on the messenger. Elisha wasn't interested in fame or accolades or pyrotechnics. What he was is someone who had a close relationship with God, was able to understand where God was at work in a situation, and understood that that revelation was his invitation to join God, and he simply was an obedient servant. We're best in evangelism when we see ourselves as obedient servants. We're also reminded in today's story that leprosy is a picture of what life apart from God looks like. Naaman appeared to have it all, but there was something that was missing in his life. And that would be true of those we're called to share the message of Christ with. And finally, we see that healing often comes before faith. We're reminded that when Jesus roamed the earth, that often he took care of needs and healed people, and faith then followed. Well, hopefully you've gathered some ideas and some insights and some truths about evangelism by our study of evangelism in the Old Testament. Well, next week we'll conclude our unit with a lesson that takes a look at the prophets Isaiah and Zechariah. The lesson is entitled The Lord's Mountain. And once again, we'll take a look to see if we can tease out some clues from the Old Testament about what evangelism in modern times needs to look like. Until then, I hope you have a great week. God bless you, and we'll see you again next time.